Welcome everyone to our study, the progressive stages of meditation and emptiness. Because today is the Kini day, and some of the crowd here might be tantrikas that need to do Gana Puja, I'm going to finish the program a little earlier. In fact, what I'll do is just skip the normal introduction to meditation, and I think a lot of you already know what we're doing when we're meditating. So we'll just go after the study session. We'll just go straight into the practice. As always, kindly generate the bodhicitta intention, which is intending to apply what we're studying here to the path with the objective to ultimately establish all sentient beings at the level of perfect liberation. And so, in the course of our study, we've I think somebody was saying that last week I was pissed off. It might have been because at one point I say, if you don't study this, it's a waste of time. Maybe that's what how that was interpreted. But that's actually true. I have to say this. We're going to have to take this study serious. I think everybody really is very sincere with their appreciation of the Buddhist path. But sometimes there's a sense that, well, there's all these teachings, and as long as we just do those practices we're supposed to do, then isn't that all right? And I would say, of course it is. But at the same time, it so strengthens what we're doing if we actually have an awareness of what it is that needs to be eliminated, and why it is essentially what we're talking about in the Buddhist teaching is a condition of delusion, and why it is that we say our fixation on a self is delusion. Why do we say that the world is, you could say, like a dream, a mere appearance without any substantial reality? Why do we say that? And that's where we're delving into, you could say, dimensions and perspectives. Not really dimensions, sorry, that's a really misleading word, but let's say perspectives. We're diving into an analysis. It's a bit like when people have prejudices, you know? I was brought up by a father who thought that Jewish people were a lot smarter than the rest of us. And, well, maybe that's true, I don't know. But anyway, it's not really sort of generally regarded as PC these days to sort of voice these kind of opinions. And certainly, the thing is, when we have prejudices, for example, between races and also between assumptions, the people who live on the other side of the tracks or who lived in that neighborhood, they are in a particular way. And that's where all it takes is actually to know somebody from that neighborhood, or to actually know you could say the realities, rather than be stuck in our ideas, that actually our assumptions begin to come undone. And that's what we mean with analysis. And that's what we mean with shifting perspectives. And that's where we, in the Buddhist teaching, we analyze, we look at things, we look at our assumptions. We might, for example, also think it's really justified that I'm angry, And that's where we can analyze and say, does anger really help? No, it doesn't really help, Or I want this thing because it's going to make me ultimately happy. Well, then again, not that the Buddha is going to be somebody who is a party pooper, but the Buddha is going to come and say, attachment to things that are composed and which you ultimately cannot take with you is not going to bring you ultimate happiness. These kind of insights, they actually constitute what we could call vipassana. They could constitute what we can call wisdom. And that's where, of course, it's good that we do all these various practices, but it is really important that we have some vision about where it is we go wrong. And it's a beautiful thing, because it's humbling. It's where we know, hey, I'm not that smart. I'm suffering from some delusional assumptions. And this actually goes at a very deep level. It's not that all of a sudden we say, okay, I'm going to, snap to it. get with the program, and now I'm no longer confused. It's something that persists. The attachment to ourselves, the attachment to solidifying and objectifying things as solid, runs very deep. So we're going to live with the awareness that we're not quite getting it right. And that's why you also see Buddhist masters being very humble. You see, my teacher, Dinghu Chenzo Rinpoche, he would sign himself, when he would write something, he would say, like one place he wrote, the useless old Mani reciter, or, other terms that actually reflect how even great practitioners, they know that there's still something to be realized. So it's all right for us to know that we don't know, but it is important for us to begin to actually cotton on to and begin to see what it is that really is the foundation for the various practices, what we do. and that's where we, on one hand, we understand how confusion arises. We also understand how it's not something that ultimately has a grip on us. We're not defined in terms of being in a particular way. And we have a very practical path. And that's where the path is something that has immediate relevance for us. And it has relevance for everyone around us. We're all suffering from the same disease. So when we generate the motivation of bodhicitta, it's not some extraordinary, impossible feat, even though, of course, we'd like to develop it to the nth degree that possibly lies beyond how we think of others right now. But at the same time, it really just comes from an awareness that there's others out there. So unless we sort of retreat into a complete, condition of isolation and sort of, misanthropical sort of hating the world and all of that, then naturally we have this condition, but we share confusion with others. Others are confusion. There's a prevailing condition of innocence that really should be at the forefront of what we're doing here, and understanding that we and all the other confused individuals, we're all suffering from a particular condition that is very curable. So anyway, that's why we study here, and that's why it really is so important. And this, the sort of the texts that I find, they're generally quite easy to approach. There are some scriptures that present the teachings on emptiness in a way that's mind-blowing, and I would warmly recommend them. These are the sutras, but they are mind-blowing, and sometimes we don't know. So I'm almost gonna go, what? Like even the Heart Sutra, no ear, no nose, etc. No, basically just everything we studied in the Abhidharma, none of it has any reality. And that's where it can be sort of like a bit confounding. What exactly do we mean with that? And how does that fit into our understanding of the world? And it fits in, it's essential to our understanding of the world, but the words might be a little bit difficult. So that's where it's very helpful to have what we can call shastras, or commentaries that unravel the meaning of the sutras. So now we've looked at, so this text here, it's going to be going through some stages of increasingly profound understandings of insightful, or you could say increasingly radical perceptions of the nature of what we perceive as our reality, and particularly introducing how our reality is not as solid as it appears. So we looked at the what was referred to as the Shravaka perspective, which identifies no self, in the sense that what we normally actually think of as me, we can actually see as nothing but a set of singular moments. And we can see these singular moments, they can be interrupted. So that's where we can say this whole sense of I that gets all wound up about something, it only exists as long as we follow that thought. And that's also why in meditation we actually begin to sort of cut that. And that's where we begin to see self is very much something that we perpetuate on the basis of our attachment and fixation on our sense of self, on the basis of our consciousness, but where we can, Shravaka, you could say, the gist of the Shravaka teaching is that this in fact are mere moments of consciousness, very fine moments of consciousness that give a sense of continuity. But in fact, there is none. Otherwise, we'd always be stuck, and we're not. So that's where that, and then also the perspective that what appears out there as a solid world of, you know, houses and people and mountains and earth and all of that. Yeah, it appears like that, but actually it is nothing but just a set of dependent arising conditions. Like Rinpoche was like, yeah, this sort of notion of a firebrand or whatever, where we attribute solidity to what is in fact just mere appearance. And that's where the Shravaka perspective is to say, look, everything is just made up of particles. So that's where the Shravaka perspective and what we call the tenets within the Mahayana that we call Vibhashika and Sutrantika, they're very aligned with some of the notions that we have within physics, traditional physics, and also ideas around mind in neuroscience and psychology. There are those who would identify how, in fact, we just construct self in relation to just particular conditions. Nevertheless, there would still be a sense of solidly existing consciousness. So now we're going to go into the Mahayana. The Mahayana, and Khenpo will explain this much better, so I'll abstain from sort of giving you the whole the whole thing about the Mahayana. The Mahayana, it essentially it does not take any object, whether it's mental or out there objective, as ultimately existing, and as such, there's not the subtle reference points to neither mind nor object, and that we would say, when we have those reference points, they are essentially seen as being still cognitive obscurations. They're still reference points, and it's on the basis of that the subtle aspects of both sense of self and the sense of object hasn't really been removed. So the real no self hasn't actually been attained at that level, and that's where we talk about the Mahayana in terms of the scope as a greater scope of reality, a greater ontological scope, and also a greater courage, because the Shravaka from the Mahayana perspective is called Hinayana. And that's also because it is the foundational vehicle in which we just really are concerned about ourselves and our liberation. The Mahayana understands that that entire notion of self is tied up still with the cognitive obscuration. And right from the start makes it clear that our enlightenment will never really take place as long as we're still holding on to self. And in fact, breaking that with a greater awareness of our reality and a greater awareness of other sentient being, really is the spirit of the Mahayana. So in that sense, the Mahayana stands in contrast to then the foundational aspects of the path, which we call Hinayana. So the Khenpo says, and so within the Mahayana, we're going to look at several schools, the Chittamatra, the Madhyamika, and then various kinds of Madhyamika as well. The last thing I'll say is Chittamatra is very much about experience. It's what we could call phenomenology. It's about how we're experiencing. It's about the subjective dimension. The Madhyamika is more about the ontological aspect. It's more about how things actually abide. And so Chittamatra emphasizes mind. Madhyamika emphasizes emptiness. But we're going to see how this plays out. And certainly they all have their, you could say, validation in terms of the path. So stage 2, Chittamatra, or mind only. This is also sometimes called Yogacharya. While the Shravaka stage belongs to what is sometimes called the Hinayana, the Chittamatra stage belongs to the Mahayana. Mahayana means the great vehicle because its goal is the great goal of the enlightenment of all beings. This contrasts with the goal of the Hinayana, which is simply the cessation of one's own personal suffering. From the Mahayana point of view, the Hinayana is a true and valid means for removing the self-clinging that gives rise to the unhealthy emotions, kleshas, the root of all suffering. The Mahayana also accepts that the Hinayana removes the veils of ignorance that prevent one realizing the true nature of the skandhas as not self. In other words, as empty. However, the Mahayana teaches that the Hinayana does not remove ignorance completely. So that's like I was saying, there's still these subtle reference points with regards to consciousness and with regards to the perceived object. It simply, as a consequence, then Khenpo says, it simply removes the gross ignorance that causes kleshas and suffering. Technically, it is said that to remove simply the klesha veils, leaving the more subtle veils called knowledge veils. So we essentially, on that path, we get rid of the attachment to the self and also the attachment to the outer objects. And as such, you could say the Hinayana, and this is the point Sansa Khyentse is always making, when we talk about the arhats, which are those who realize this condition, we shouldn't think that they're spiritual amateurs in any way. They're giants. They are impressive. Persons who have completely eliminated the kleshas are impressive. They are extremely peaceful and extremely powerful. And we have a lot of stories about great masters within the Hinayana traditions and those traditions that are not Mahayana, that actually display incredible strength and realization. But still, this is not viewed as the ultimate enlightenment. And that's where we talk about sometimes, we talk about, for example, in the Buddha sadhana, there's an interesting line where we actually praise the Buddha, where we say to him, where we praise the Buddha in terms of, simply think of him as he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the two extremes. And that's why we would say samsara is one extreme, because that's being completely caught up in confusion on the basis of self and the afflictions that come with that self. In the case of the other extreme, where there's then no more affliction, then there's nevertheless a subtle sense of I. And that's why we talk about the peace of nirvana. And that's all very well, but it's still not free. It's still not the enlightened condition. One is being completely caught up in confusion and the suffering. The other is free from suffering, but the subtle confusion is still there. And so this is also where we would say there's important when we're on the spiritual path to not fall into the trap or the sidetrack of wishing personal peace, because ultimately this really just comes from a place of still this essential cause of suffering hasn't been eliminated. There's still the subtle obscurations. So that's why we say, may I achieve enlightenment beyond samsara and nirvana. We talk about these two as something that needs to be eliminated. And that's where it might sound like a paradox when we say, I want to be free from samsara and nirvana. But this is what is the implication. Of course, sometimes, and this is also confusing, we'll sometimes talk about simply saying, well, samsara is the confused state, nirvana is the not confused state. And that's actually what we mean with that is then nirvana in the sense of enlightenment. So then we can sometimes talk about the great nirvana and the lesser nirvana. But certainly here, what the Khenpo is saying is that there's still some cognitive obscurations that haven't been eliminated at the level of the Shravaka of the Hinayana. So the Khenpo continues, kleshas and suffering are extinguished like the flame of a candle whose wax is exhausted, and the meditator passes into a state of peace. The meditator believes this to be nirvana. And this is why we also refer to this condition as nirod or gokpa in Tibetan, which just means a state of essentially a static state, time out, if you like. And so that's where where the Mahayanists, and of course what this particularly has evolved in terms of the historical development of Buddhism, was essentially Nagarjuna, who pointed out that some of the Buddhist traditions, they were getting caught up in a little bit of a misunderstanding, but it never really resulted in a big, you could say, conflict. It was just that Nagarjuna's point was that that's all very well, but it's not perfect enlightenment. And so the general Mahayana view on this approach is not really that, you could say, dismissive. There's just a view that it's a bit like if you're crossing the ocean, then it's legit that you want to stop on an island halfway and take a break. And that's where the approach of the Arhats and the Hinayanists are seen as a valid approach, but at the same time, not perfect enlightenment. So the Khenpo continues, however, the Mahayanas realizes that even in this state of peace, there is still a subtle kind of ignorance. It is ignorance of the true nature of reality, and this ignorance obscures the fullness and potential that a human being has. Human beings can actually reach a state of perfect and complete awakening in which they are endowed with all the powers of a Buddha. This means all the powers that work for the benefit of all sentient creatures and bring them finally to perfect and complete awakening. So that's where we talk about awakening, then comes with the elimination of the cognitive obscuration, and also then the unfolding of all the innate qualities such as wisdom, compassion, and strength. So that's where there's a much greater vision in the Mahayana, and also you can see this reflected in the Mahayana Sutras, where if you read Mahayana Sutras, they have incredible, you could say, inconceivable perspective. They think big, they speak big, they talk about, you could say, perspectives on reality that goes beyond anything that we could ever imagine. So that's where, like the great iconoclast and great sage Gendin Chimpel, he said, and here I'm quoting Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, who's quoting him, who said, you know, when you come to the Mahayana, you have to get used to the notion of the inconceivability. And so if you come across the Mahayana Sutras, they are very often speak in terms that are absolutely inconceivable. So the Khenpo says, thus, the motive for progressing further is compassion for other beings and the wish to remove their suffering. Compassion alone is not enough. However, it's also necessary to have the vision to see that the power to liberate others arises from seeing the true nature of reality more deeply. One has to aspire to remove all one's subtle veils of ignorance and to realize supreme awakening of the Buddha. These veils of ignorance are called the veils of ignorance, and those subtle are very powerful. Sorry, these veils of ignorance are called the veils of knowledge, and those subtle are very powerful. They pervade and distort the way one sees and understands the whole of one's experience and prevent one knowing anything properly in the absolute sense. So when we talk about compassion here, it needs to be infused with something that goes beyond just the ordinary dualistic compassion. Because we're familiar with the notion that we feel compassion for others, but that's still very much caught up in a dualistic construction that we can see. And in the context of this, the Chittamatra, we'll see the point really is that us constructing self and other is very much a cognitive obscurations. It's a belief, it's an artificial construct. And so as long as we still think other sentient beings, it's still a minor compassion. The real compassion goes beyond that. And that's why we would talk real compassion in the completely awakened state is what we call non-referential compassion. It's compassion that doesn't have any sense of duality. It doesn't think in terms of, oh, poor sentient beings, let me help them. It doesn't have that. There's just a completely organic presence for sentient beings without any notion of self and other. So that it's only at that level really that compassion attains its complete potential. And that's where we then speak about the unity of wisdom and compassion. So Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso says, thus, the Bodhisattva has two great aspirations. One is to eliminate all sentient beings, and the other is to realize the profound emptiness of all phenomena, the realization of the fully awakened Buddha. This double aspiration is called giving rise to the enlightened mind, bodhicitta pata and chanchup senkye. So giving rise or arousing this mind of enlightenment. so it possesses these two qualities that are absolutely inseparable. Emptiness of phenomena doesn't mean that that there's nothing there. It's just that we're no longer deluded by our way of thinking, our in terms of grasping on and constructing self and other. So there's the absence of that, and within that there's the spontaneous capacity to benefit others. So in this way, us honing in on that, the yoga of bodhicitta, is the beginning to align ourselves with that natural capacity for warmth, for love, for compassion, and all the practices that go with that. And at the same time, also an increasing awareness into the nature of phenomena. So in this way, we have, as we reflected in all the many sort of pith instructions of the Mahayana path, we have, like in the way of the Bodhisattva, the teachings on Lojong and so on, we continually come back to these two aspects, which is understanding emptiness, understanding wisdom, and understanding compassion. So that's where the path of the Mahayana is really premised on this aspiration to achieve complete understanding of reality and to not retreat into peace, but rather to benefit all sentient beings. So there's this incredible scope, vastness, strength of mind, courage. So the Khenpo says, with this aspiration as the foundation, one proceeds to the next stage of the meditation on emptiness. Chittamatra means mind only, or merely mind. As at the Shravaka stage, at the Chittamatra stage, one thinks of one's mind stream as a stream of moments of consciousness, vijnana, with a knowing and known aspect to each moment. However, whereas at the Shravaka stage, one takes for granted a world out there beyond the senses, at the Chittamatra stage, this is questioned. Chittamatrans do not take a sort of solipsistic view that the world is nothing but one's own invention, as if the skandhas were one's self. So the Chittamatrans doesn't fall into thinking, oh, there's only me here. It's all just, it's all just sort of projection out there. There's nobody in this world except me. That's sort of this solipsist view that there is, you could say it's justified because nobody has ever experienced anybody else's experience, at least not ordinary people, right? So we all sit there with the experience that, as far as I know, there's only me. There's all these other people, but they're kind of maybe just sort of seconds, in the picture. And so that's where this view of solipsism is very much one that is framed in terms of there's only the mind, and that's not what the Chittamatrans mean. They really just mean that the perceptions and the apparent perceptions of self and of the world is entirely created by the mind. So this is very justified. We're going to have to work with the mind, and the Chittamatrans they have done so much for the Buddhist teaching in terms of mapping all the aspects of the path. So, like I started off saying, they're very much the phenomenologists. They're very much the ones that look at experience. So the Khenpo says, essentially, the Chittamatran approach, like any Buddhist approach, is based on direct experience, following the Shravaka pattern of trying to be intimately aware of every moment of consciousness as it arises. At the Chittamatran stage, the meditator realizes that the division of each moment of awareness into an inner perceiving mind and a separate outer perceived object is a conceptual invention. And that's where we talk about duality. There's a sense that me, and then there's the other, self and other. That's where the Chittamatrans, they begin to realize this is in fact just a dualistic process of labeling. So it's founded on some projections, some perceptions, yes, but they are actually not real. And the problem lies in us attributing solidity to these appearances. So illustrating this, then the Khenpo says, in a dream, one experiences moment by moment, inner perceiving moments of consciousness, aware of seemingly outer perceived objects. And yet, when one wakes up, one realizes there were no outer perceived objects, other than the mind itself. Both the inner perceiving moments of consciousness and the outer perceived objects were different manifestations of the mind. This we have to acknowledge. This is what happens in our dreams. It's very real, and yet all of it doesn't take place anywhere except within our mind. We would say these are manifestations of something we call the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, and we would say the phenomenal world that we experience is similar. So Khenpo says this shows, referring to the dream example, that the mere appearance of seemingly outer perceived objects is no proof that such things exist in absolute terms. In fact, there is no proof that there is any substance other than the mind anywhere. Furthermore, the Buddha himself taught, and this is quoting the Lankavatara Sutra, the three realms of existence are merely mind. Now here what we're saying really is just that there is presently for us, everything that we have goes through consciousness. It's not that we're particularly, some people might think, oh, isn't that a very cerebral thing? And that's if we think mind has something to do with the brain. Not really. Does it mean that we then don't care about the world? We have no love. We just think that everything is just all in the mind? No, but it's just taking into account that everything that we experience, even you could say the perception of our own physicality, the world around us, what we call the objects of our love and affection, the objects of our irritation and so forth, all of that, the perception of it is constructed by our consciousness. So we can't really run away from the fact that everything is actually created and perceived through this consciousness. This consciousness is what essentially constructs the whole experience of confusion. So what has happened when we lost or got lost and are wandering in samsara is essentially the original condition of the unconfused all of a sudden becomes confused and reduced, retracts into this dualistic sense of I and the objects of I. And that's what we're on to here. So that's where we're talking about the three realms of existence are merely mind. This is not solipsism. This is really just identifying where exactly, and this we can verify, where does it all come from in terms of the appearances that we solidify? Well, that's us. This is us solidifying our perceptions. It's the mind that does it. So this is also where we have a very different science in Buddhism, famously. It's all very well to look at the objects, but unless actually we really understand the mind, we're never really understanding our reality. And once we include that, then the mind in our understanding as the primary creator of this apparent reality, then it is that we see the difference between the mind that goes into confusion and solidifies and the mind that's free. And that's where we then have these two, what you can call phenomenologies, or these two experiences, or these two realities of samsara and nirvana. And that's what the Buddha specializes in. The Buddha, as the doctor, is merely concerned about where sentient beings really, where does the suffering really come from? And so that's where the Buddha's advantage as a scientist is the Buddha does not exclude consciousness. The Buddha understands how consciousness works, how consciousness creates reality. And that's where the Buddha then as a doctor is ultimately successful in addressing really the issue of the illness of universally of the world, of all sentient beings. So that's why we take refuge in the Buddha. So the Khenpo says, thus, having already established that there is no personal self in the skandhas, the Chittamatra now looks at the skandhas themselves with greater precision. Not only is there no permanent, single, and independent self in the skandhas, but there is no difference in nature between mind and matter. Mind and matter are empty of separate, independent natures. Thus, in absolute terms, each moment of experience is empty of a difference in nature of perceiver and perceived. Rather than regarding the mind as merely the seeing or observing aspect of a moment of experience, it is also the content of that experience. So that's going back to what we did at the level of the previous level, at the Shravaka level, is that we analyze, can we find anything that is permanent, single, and independent in the self? And also, can we also, this we extend also to phenomena around us, can we find anything that is permanent, single, and independent? And we can see we never find anything that is single. Everything that we find stands in relationship. Everything that we break down can be broken down further. Everything stands as part of a web that we then construct and label as solid. But there is actually no solidity in the phenomena that we perceive. And again, going back to Western physics, this is where we talk about particles, atoms, etc., and all that. But the thing is, we take this, we go further than that, just saying, okay, there must be some building blocks. We say even building blocks, they themselves must have parts. So ultimately, everything standing in relation, there's never anything that actually constitutes a singular part that then constitutes, you could say, for there to be, you could say, something that is aggregated of many different things, there would have to actually be single parts that constitute that. Just like if, for example, I look at this mouse, or not to confuse anybody, then let's just say a watch, then we would say there's many different parts in that. And that's fair enough on a conventional level. But if we analyze, then even these parts can be broken down, and we never come down to what we can call the partless particle. So in that sense, both the subjective dimension and also the objective dimension doesn't have any reality and only exists in terms of us labeling things in a particular way. So that's where the experience of the object is entirely premised on the perceiving subject that labels and perceives things in a particular way. So that's where we say it's not just that we have a moment of experience, but also what is contained in that experience is in fact nothing but experience, in the sense that it's something that we label in a particular way. I would like you to request to please keep thinking about this, because this is very different to how we ordinarily think about things. But it is actually essential for us to understand in order for us to know what the Buddhists they mean with emptiness. Sometimes people think emptiness, well, that's sort of a state, isn't it? You're just sort of in a state where everything's what? I don't know, some sort of state. But it's not that. It is the way that things actually abide. It's the way how our consciousness abides. It's how the phenomenal world abides. So it's really just science that goes a bit deeper than ordinary science and takes into account how it is that we construct what we call qualia, or phenomena as having a particular substance or quality. So then the Khenpo says mind is at one and the same time both real and empty. It's real in the sense that all experience is basically a manifestation of mind. It is empty in the sense that it is not a permanent, single, and independent entity. It is instead a stream of fleeting, dependently arising moments of consciousness. So everything that we perceive really just arises as us labeling things in a particular way. If we analyze, we can just see these are just conditions. Just like if we twirl a torch very quickly, it looks like there's a solid ring of fire. But if we analyze, there is actually no basis for an actual ring of fire. It's just perception. So the Khenpo says, furthermore, all phenomena pertain either to the inner perceiving aspects of consciousness or to the outer perceived aspects of consciousness. So whether we are labeling something outside, as I label that thing a cushion, whereas a bird would label it differently, and in fact, if we analyze it, take it apart, there's nothing except just increasing, you could say, greater, more and more space as we go into analyzing something. So this is something we can analyze, and that's where we, at the same time, we can see that we are labeling experience in particular ways. So the outer perceived objects are perceived through consciousness. So that's where inner, outer, all is in fact consciousness. In other words, they are all mind. So the Khenpo says, so the whole of existence is empty of a duality of substance, between mind and matter. This means there is no limit to the mind or its power. So in principle, a person could realize the full powers of the Buddha's enlightenment and work for the liberation of all beings. So the mind is incredibly powerful. What we in fact are experiencing in the unenlightened, confused condition is a diminishing of mind's power to sort of a half-life or a shadow existence. But we nevertheless can still see how it applies, that this deluded mind is able to project the reality that constitutes our personal being, our body, our perceptions, and the phenomenal world. Now, this is something we do on the basis of analysis. We don't need to take ayahuasca or drop acid, or you could say go into strange states of mind. This is all about us simply just on a very domestic, ordinary kitchen sink level, just analyzing our self and analyzing our phenomena. So the Khenpo Sen says, on reflection, one can see that the Shravaka approach is similar to removing suffering in a dream by recognizing that the person in the dream is not really oneself. The Chittamatra approach is like removing the suffering by realizing that both the cause of the suffering, for example, the fire or the tiger, and the person suffering are both nothing more than the play of the mind. So this way, if we're in a dream and all of a sudden we know that we're dreaming, then we're no longer held by this unconscious condition. We're all of a sudden aware. And so we can say there's not really a self. We can basically say there's all of a sudden there's a component of awareness. We know we're dreaming. So that's where there's no solid reality then in terms of our perceptions. And then the dreams are a bit lighter. Realizing that, the Khenpo says, one realizes that the fire or the tiger, meaning things that we might be afraid of, and the one suffering are empty of any reality on their own. Furthermore, recognizing that it is the mind producing both, one could choose to dream of whatever one wanted to. This may be also sometimes if we recognize dreams, then we can change them. Not only is one liberated from the illusion of self, one is liberated from the sense of powerlessness. That sense of powerlessness prevents one realizing one's true nature and limits one's capacity for compassionate action. And that's also where really a quality of the sage is that there's never a sense of powerlessness. There's never a sense of cannot do, because there's an understanding that phenomena are not stuck in being one way or another. So we can change them. Everything works on the basis of causes and conditions. Everything is a dependent arising. And so it's about how we interact with these perceptions. There's a very famous quote from Dharmakirti who says, because everything sits on the pinpoint of one's attitude. Because that's the other way around. Because everything is dependent on, because everything arises in dependency, in that everything is a dependent arising, it sits on the pinpoint of our attitude. Meaning, because things are just, you could say, a flux of all sorts of causes and conditions, how we perceive things, that determines what they are. So already we are creating the world that we're perceiving right now, and we can work with that. So with anything that is perceived as negative, we can change into perceiving it as positive one. Just like in a dream, we can change our particular experience. So this is what, for example, mind training is all about. Anything that is perceived as an obstacle can actually be turned into something that benefits us. So there's this incredible sense of empowerment and freedom from powerlessness. So that's a very important point. Yeah, let's do some questions. What are the name of the 3 realms? The 3 realms just means samsara. So the 3 realms refer to different aspects of samsara. The first aspect is what we call the desire realm, and that's essentially 99% of samsara. It's really all the lower realms. Then you have what's called the realm of form, which are the God realms. and where there's very much as the first ones are very much caught up with the gross states of mind, likes and dislikes, wanting and so on. So like I said, that's most of samsara. But then you have the form realms, and that's more sort of the religious, those who have practiced spirituality or virtue and so on. They're born in higher realms of great peace and joy. And then that's the form realm. And then you have the formless realms, and that's those who then abide in spiritual, you could say, samadhi. And they don't even have a perception of outer objects. They just remain in samadhi. So the last two there,
But there is still suffering in that realm, or
yeah, it's still samsara, because there's still a sense of I. So all of the realms of samsara, what we call the desire realm, is very much the gross mind. The form realm are more the blissful states, and are very much the experiences of what we could call heaven. You know, all the various religions talk about heaven. If you're a good boy and girl, you go to heaven, and that's then what is seen as the outcome of a completely virtuous, clean, pure mind. Then there's the particularly refined wisdom that is able to just settle into formless conditions like samadhi on the basis of yoga, on the basis of various spiritual practices. And that's more sort of associated with mysticism, settling into.
They still have craving,
no, but they still have a subtle sense of self. So there's still a sense of I am in you know.
Very hard to transcend that much.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's true. The question is, this must be hard to transcend. Yes, because of that, because it is so subtle, it lasts for a very long time. But we'd also say because those who are in the God realms and those who are in this kind of spiritual dimension, they have incredible insight. So when it finally the day comes where you could say the causes and conditions for their samadhi ceases, they know where they're going to be reborn. And this creates enormous suffering. So that's where we say even the gods, they suffer from eventually falling from grace. Yeah.
Would the flower ornament be considered one of those texts of the greatness?
Yeah. Yeah, the question is the flower ornament scripture. Is that one of the Mahayana scriptures that I was talking about? Yes, very much. Yeah, the flower ornament scripture really sort of is mind-blowing. Yeah. Yeah, Rodrigo.
No, I was going to ask if in the spiritual path we go progressively from one realm to another one, or from the desire realm we go to the next realm of form, and then from this we can just break through.
So the question is, when we talk about these three realms, it's the sense that the spiritual path goes through these. In some way, yes, because as our obscurations and our kleshas become less, then we're more and more aligned with, you could say, a more refined condition that's free from the gross kleshas. So you can say, yes, on the spiritual path, if it wasn't that we had wisdom, if we just practiced, you could say, the spirit, if we just stuck with practice without the wisdom of emptiness, then we would essentially still be in the three realms. We wouldn't go beyond. Because, for example, if we're meditating, well, we have a peaceful mind. If we practice the paramitas, the generosity, patience, all of that, we become great people. That's wonderful. We create all the conditions for higher rebirth. So, and meditation too, among the 6 paramitas, right? Meditation. So it's only with prajna that understands the emptiness that we actually are free. So that's why, again, this is why this emptiness business is so important, because without understanding emptiness, then we wouldn't be free of samsara. However much we practice something really profound and beautiful and spiritual, unless we understand emptiness, we're still going to be caught in the dream.
Like the formless realm, they also have prajna, the beings.
No, that's the thing about the formless realms. Any of the 3 realms, they lack prajna.
How do they get
They have prajna to some extent, but they don't have the full prajna. So they have, of course, some wisdom that understand cause and effect, and they operate with the causes that create this. But the ultimate understanding of emptiness is going beyond cause and effect. Understanding the unconditional nature of emptiness is beyond cause and effect.
So prajna abides in the desired realm.
No, prajna is what frees us from samsara. Prajna is what we're studying here, wisdom, emptiness. The sword of Manjushri that he holds is what cuts through our confusion. So that's why this is important. Yeah. Prajna is what will set us free in conjunction with compassion. So, okay, good. Thank you. From what and or when does a Mahayana predisposition originate? Or conversely, the Hinayana predisposition. Have all Mahayana inclined people at one point been Hinayana? I suppose we could say so. You know, the way that we present the Hinayana teaching, particularly in the modern world, where because now we're really very much sort of a, you could say, a multicultural globalist community of Buddhists. It's not no good if we're going to go and point fingers at some other traditions and say, oh, these people are the Hinayanists and so on. But in general, we even within the Mahayana itself, we really just talk about the Hinayana as, you could say, a doctrinal position. So when we talk about the Shravakayana and so on, it's really just a doctrinal position. And it's, you could say, where we begin. And that's also the Khenpo's point here, is really that this is something we gradually begin. We begin with seeing that phenomena are, you could say, put together, dependent arising on the basis of conditions that initially seem real. And then gradually we begin to see even the foundations of what appears what gives us these perceptions. Even the foundations, they themselves are also not real. So there's a gradual development. But the Mahayana predisposition, it's an interesting term because we would say that this is, that is essentially our Buddha nature. So naturally we have this Mahayana predisposition. It's of course the inclination towards the Mahayana is the moment that we begin to be concerned for others. We talk about the Buddha in a previous life who was reborn in hell and was really at that moment of sympathizing with somebody else in hell and say, hey, take a break, let me do whatever it is that you're doing and you take a break. That moment the Buddha was free. And we would say that is where the Buddha's bodhicitta or Mahayana predisposition came forth. The Hinayana predisposition is the wish to be liberated, but only for oneself. So in a way, you could say we normally on the spiritual path, we start off first having concern for ourselves, and then gradually, when we get a bit over ourselves, then we also begin to have a greater awareness that develops this compassion. In saying that mind is the content of experience, can we understand it as mind taking on the quality of whatever it perceives while not existing in and of itself? Well, it's not so much that mind takes on the quality, it's more that mind projects that quality. And yes, we would say even that mind itself doesn't exist in and of itself, but temporarily, we would say the projecting mind it is the projecting confused mind that creates the perception of objects and their qualities. So experience is mind, or manifests as what we may experience as mind, and there is no independent entity called mind apart from experience. That's right. That's right. Yeah. So it is the mind that projects phenomena, and what we experience, that is this mind. And yes, there is no independent entity called mind apart from experience. That's right. And that's why we would say that Chittamatra really are the phenomenologists, because they emphasize this aspect. there's sometimes a little bit of chauvinism happening where there's a hierarchy. Would say Madhyamaka is more advanced view, and in the ontological sense, yes, in the sense that they assert that phenomena ultimately are empty. But some would say that the Chittamatrans, they know that, and it's really just to communicate that they use the word of the mind, which is the word, the essential for the practice of the path. So we would have the experience of mind that we need to relate to, and that really constitutes the nature of the entire path. What about the sense that nothing in samsara may be fixed? One thing is perception, and another the experience of one's perceptions. So while it may appear that a change in attitude is possible, we can't fix anything as there is nothing to fix. That's a little bit mixing up the two levels here, because on the you can say when we talk about that there's nothing that's fixed, that's from the point of view of us analyzing and understanding, you say, absolute truth. But from the point of view of relative truth, then yes, then of course we need to fix things, and we operate within normal conventions. So we shouldn't confuse the two. We should understand that in absolute truth, everything is, you could say, is uncreated. There's nothing that needs to be fixed. But on the relative level, yes, there's very much something needs to be fixed. But the beauty of that is that because things they are flexible, then within, yes, conventional reality, then we can move things, we can shift things. So that's where the insight, the prajna that sees the emptiness of phenomena and that sees how things exist on the basis of causes and conditions, the wisdom of emptiness enables us to deal more skillfully with that relative reality. It seems like even though things may not be solid, there are degrees of how held together things are. I guess we try and focus on the things that are less stuck, the things that can move more, rather than things that are more strongly fixed. Yeah, well, we should. I mean, we should, according to our own capacity and our own degree of understanding that. I mean, we have an intuitive understanding of how things can be changed, and we have an intuitive understanding of working constructively with our conditions. So we do what we can, but at the same time, what we're doing here is a radical approach that actually doesn't really allow us to just sort of rest on our laurels and saying, okay, I'm working as best I can, because there's very much a sense that here we'd want to actually drive home the point that everything really is workable. So of course, on a practical level, we do what we can, but we should also have that knowledge that understands how things, because they're dependent arising, because they're empty of inherent nature, that there's no, that we can, right now we can stop at a certain place, but eventually, you know, we should know that there's nothing actually that can't be changed, moved, and so forth. That's again coming back to the whole Mahayana spirit, really, of the infinitude of the Bodhisattva's capacity. Okay, we'll stop at this point. And let's just see where we got to in the text. Okay, we'll continue here next time. So like I said, today we're going to do things slightly differently. So we'll start the practice right away. So we'll take a 2-minute break, then we'll start the practice, and we'll finish a bit earlier. So we'll conclude the dedication. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish evermore and more. Okay, 2-minute break. In the Buddha and the Dharma and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel lion throne and lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, Lion of the Shakyas. His body the color of gold adorned with major and minor marks, clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture. His right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding his arms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close sons, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the 2 extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues, the body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teaching ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, I'm accumulating now and will accumulate in the future. For the benefit of all beings who are as infinite as space, may you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the 3 jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Te yata muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yata muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yata muni muni mahamunaya soha. Jayatao 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 Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Om 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 Mani Muni Mahamunaya Soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations, and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like them. Today we'll just go to the last page, the concluding aspiration prayers. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachings. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignata. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. So thank you very much for joining us here, and see you again. Yes. Inshallah.